Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be working on a lot of seed starting. It's one of those weeks that I am going to be starting a ton of seeds today, so I thought we could talk a little bit more about what we're going to be starting in February. And we'll also talk a little bit about some best practices. Now, we've done several videos on seed starting. If you haven't watched any of my seed starting videos, I will make sure to link them down below, but I highly recommend you go back and watch some of those because they are a little bit more detailed in terms of the seeds that I bought for our cut flower garden this year. I also showed you guys an in-depth video of our seed starting room, all of the supplies that we like to use, and of course we also talked more about where I like to buy my seeds. So this is kind of the first round of seeds that arrived. I have a couple of more orders coming in, which I'm really excited about, but we have a ton of things to start today. We actually have about 350 seeds that we're going to be starting today, which if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, that's 350 little seedlings. That's 350 flowers that are going to be out in our garden. And this year, I think we're going to be planting around maybe 2,500, 3,000 seeds. I'm not sure yet. I'm just kind of trying to weigh things out and see what our cut flower garden is going to look like, what our actual garden is going to look like, because you guys do know I like to tuck in cut flowers all over my garden, even in my landscape. So I'm just trying to really plan out methodically what is going to go in our landscape this year in terms of cut flowers. Now, I started out this video outside today, but it started to rain really hard. There was a tree cutter outside. It was so loud. And then I thought about doing it in our cut flower shed, but the heater isn't hooked up yet. So I just thought we're gonna do it inside. So we're in my unfinished kitchen. I hope you guys don't mind, but I do have a 10-foot island, which makes seed starting actually so much more enjoyable when I can do it indoors where it's nice and warm and cozy and I'm not out there in the elements. So before we jump in, I already have my trays ready and set to go. We start these the same way that we do it every time. If you recall in my previous seed starting video, we did talk about how I like to use potting soil versus seed starting mix. If you want to learn more about that, again, I highly recommend you watch that video. But in short, I just find that potting mix, a good potting mix that has a lot of pumice in it, provides more nutrients for our seedlings right out the gate, and they tend to do better. So for me, I skip the seed starting mix and I go straight into the potting mix. It's what has worked for me. Our seedlings were probably the best that they ever were last year, so I don't see myself going back and using seed starting mix unless I'm using very tiny trays. Like if I'm using a 288 cell, then I probably would do a seed starting mix, but all of my trays that I'm using are 50 cells, so it actually works out perfect. So I follow the same steps every time. I first start by wetting my soil. You don't need it to be drenching wet. However, I actually rinse off my trays at the very end just to get excess soil around them off. So my soil tends to be a little bit more wet than usual, but really you just want it to hold its form. You don't need it to be dripping wet. But I also noticed that when I lay down my vermiculite, it actually helps it settle in a bit more when my soil is a little bit more wet. So that is another thing that I like to do. One of the questions that I get about using potting soil versus seed starting mix is, do I sift it through a sieve? And I don't. I just don't have the time or the patience to do that, but that is definitely something that you can do, especially if you're using a potting soil that has a lot of like larger bark, because the goal is you want that seed to make contact with the soil. If it's sitting on a piece of bark or like a wood chip, it's not going to have a good germination. So you want to make sure that your soil or your seed is touching the soil as best as it can. Of course, when I start my seeds, I just do a kind of a quick look to make sure there's no big chunks of bark or anything like that. So everything is making contact with the soil. And if you are using a potting mix, make sure it has a lot of pumice, or you can always add your pumice in because you want it to be very loose. So for efficiency purposes, I like to start all of my seeds outdoors and then I bring them in, or I might do it outdoors, or I do it in the back of my truck like you guys saw in my previous video on seed starting, or I'll do it in my cut flower shed. It just really depends on the day, the time that I have. But the quicker I can streamline my process, the easier it's going to be and the more efficient I'm going to be at actually sowing the seeds. And my studio is serving as storage, so there's no other area to do this other than my kitchen. All right, now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about which flowers I am going to start sowing in February. We already went through all of these with pictures and everything when we ordered these seeds together, so I'm just gonna go down the list and tell you which ones I'm gonna be starting in February. So for Lysianthus, I am going to be doing Voyage to Lavender. That is such a pretty one. We also have Lysidora Apricot. I haven't grown this one before, but I'm very excited about that one. And then we also have Roseanne 2 Terracotta, which is just such an interesting and beautiful color. I also went ahead and ordered a Dalmatian Peach Foxglove. These are absolutely stunning. I cannot wait to have those tucked away in the landscape. For the snapdragons that I am going to be starting from seed, I went ahead and ordered the Potomac Lavender. This one is stunning. I love that snapdragon so much. I also have the Chantilly Light Salmon, first time growing that one, and then Madame Butterfly Bronze, which I cannot wait. Now remember, I am ordering some plugs for some of these flowers, so we will also have some more varieties to play with in the cut flower garden. And then we have Rudbeckia Sahara. Now this one, I am starting a little bit early. Now I think you're supposed to start them 5 to 7 weeks. Yeah, 5 to 7 weeks before your last frost. However, I just want to get these out sooner than later, so I am going to start them now. And then we have violas, you guys, which I'm so excited about. I cannot wait for these. I have brush strokes. We have Frizzle Sizzle Mini Tapestry. We have Frizzle Sizzle Yellow Blue Swirl. Cannot wait for this one. And then we have Nature Antique Shades, which I cannot wait for this one here. So I might not get to these today, but I also have poppies and cherry caramel phlox, which I grew this one year and they are absolutely beautiful. Such a good filler in bouquets. And then I started to receive my sweet peas. Now these came from the Farmhouse Flower Farm from Marin Mathis. You guys remember we did a tour at her farm and we're going back actually this summer, which I'm so excited about. I can't wait for you guys to watch that video. But from her, we got the Peter George Whale. I also have Patricia Maryland, Albert Blue. I have 2 of those, and then Winter Sunshine Mid Blue. All right, here is our setup. We have our seeds. I have my plant tags. I have a Sharpie, and I have some scissors because I found that cutting these little plant tags, even these short ones, in half allows me to put our seedlings right up against the light without these bumping into the light. So I'm actually gonna cut these in half and we'll stick them in the tray. I also have fine vermiculite. You guys had asked which one I used or which brand I used, and I used the Hoffman horticultural vermiculite. I will link this down below, but you can typically find this at your garden centers. But again, if you can't, this is my favorite one. It's really, really fine. And again, I will make sure just to link it down below in the description box. And here are our seed trays that we are going to be needing today. I do have more prepped and ready if we need more, but we're going to start out here and see how many more we need. And I also have our humidity domes. So as soon as we get everything seated, we will put the humidity domes on top and then put them in our seed starting room. All right, let's just jump right in and get started. All right, I am going to start out with the Roseanne 2 Terracotta Lysianthus, and I don't want to brag, but I grew the most beautiful Lysianthus last year, and I was so proud of myself. And I'm going to show you exactly what I did. I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to, again, so exactly how I did it last year. Now these are 50 seeds. Now these are pelleted, which just means it has a coating on the outside to help you see them better because they're so tiny. This little coating just kind of helps you know what you're doing, and it's a bright yellow, which is really nice. It makes it a little bit easier to see. One quick little thing I wanted to mention is pelleted seeds don't typically have a long shelf life like some of our other seeds do. So it's best to sow whatever you buy that year and either give away those plants, extra plants that you might have, or whatever it is that you decide to do with them. But I typically don't like to store any of our Lysianthus. I like to order them that year and plant them out that same year. So what I'm going to do is just come in, and you're gonna see they're just impossibly tiny, but once you just get used to that size and sewing little things like this, it'll become a lot faster. So again, you can do the little tap method that I showed you guys in one of our previous videos, or you can use a little toothpick to do this as well. Now, sometimes you are going to have ones that fall in. Oh, I'm getting a lot falling in. So you know what? Let's do it the plant tag way, where we just lick the tip and then we move them. You see the little C there? So we'll use that, and then we will just sow them that way. And you might get a little bit of dirt in your mouth, but that's okay. Of course, you can just use water to do this. You don't have to lick your plant tags. Because it's easier, it's fast. Sergey's like, are you trying to take your probiotics? Yes, I'm using this as probiotics. Yeah, no, yes, that is not health advice for sure. All right, we got that tray done. So I'm just gonna cut my tag in half, and then I am going to label it. And I like to date it, that way you can keep track of germination rates. I don't know if you guys are into that, but I am a nerd and I like to know everything. So I'll just put the name on the tag like this, and then the date on the back. And in the tray they go. One quick little thing I wanted to mention is I use the vermiculite every time I sow seeds. Even the ones that said it needs light to germinate, I do a fine layer just because that helps with the algae growth, that helps with damping off. So it's just one of those things that is part of my routine, no matter what the light requirement is for those seedlings or for those seeds to start germinating. I still do a light layer if the packet says it requires light to germinate. All right, now we're going to come in and just do a fine layer of that vermiculite on the entire tray. All right, perfect. Now let me show you a snapdragon seed. It's going to be the same exact thing. These are so tiny and they're pelleted as well. So that's what they look like, and we will follow the same procedure for all of these. Look at how tiny those are. All right, we got those snapdragons in. Now again, snapdragons do need light to germinate. So I am going to do a very fine layer. Just like this. And because that soil is so wet, I don't have to water anything in, which is really nice. And when we do water our seedlings, we are going to bottom water. Like I showed you guys last time, we just fill our tray with water. We let the soil wick up the water for a few minutes, and then we drain it. Just like that. And let's label it so we don't forget. That one was Potomac lavender, just like that. And then we will actually go ahead and get these covered like this. And these are ready to go. So that's really the gist of it. I am going to continue sowing all of these seeds. And again, I am just keeping track on the calendar. I have an Excel sheet of our last frost day, which is usually around April 14th, and I count back depending on which seed I'm going to sow and when I can really start those. So for example, with zinnias, I don't get those started until we're about 4 to 6 weeks out to April 14th. So I just keep track on my Excel sheet of when I need to start things. And that's just kind of like a little reminder. I'm like, okay, Claudia, today is this week. We're going to be starting Lysianthus. Now it's this week, we're going to start snapdragons, etc. With the Lysianthus, it's also good if you guys go and do a little bit of research if you are starting Lysianthus, because they do bloom at different times. So you can succession plant them now or sow them now. That way, if you have ones that are going to be starting to bloom later in the season, you can plant them now and kind of stagger your bloom cycle depending on what you're looking for in terms of your cut flower garden. So that is one thing to keep in mind. One other quick thing I wanted to mention is I am pretty selfish when it comes to sowing my seeds. I don't like to sow more than one seed per cell unless I am sowing something that has a low germination rate, like something that's 70%. It usually tells you on the packet the percent of germination rate. So for example, with this Snapdragon, the germination rate is around 85%. So I am going to risk it and only do one seed per cell. And my biggest reasoning for that is I don't like to thin my seeds. Of course, you're going to have situations where you do have multiple seeds in one cell and you're going to have to thin it out, but I don't like to waste that time. So if I can be more precise of how I'm sowing now, it just saves you a little bit of time in the long run. Of course, it doesn't take very long to thin out your seeds, and we can always talk about that too when that time comes. But for the most part, I like to try to do one seed per cell unless you have a multi-seeder. And multi-seeders are flowers that actually do well in little clusters. So think of annual baby's breath, larkspur, bachelor's button, poppies. All of those flowers can be sown in multiples. So if you have like 3 to 4 in a cell, they will actually do just fine like that. You don't have to thin those out, which is actually really nice because you're going to have a fuller plant. So think about when you buy poppies at a garden center, there's usually like 3 to 4 little starts in that 1 gallon container. So that's something to keep in mind. If you do have something that's a multi-seeder, and I'll pop up some more examples on the screen for you guys, you can go ahead and get away with adding more than one seed per cell, which I highly recommend you do because those typically will do better in little clusters anyway. One other thing that I wanted to mention is when you're putting soil into your trays, you want to make sure that you tap them down and kind of make those little cells firm, because when you're bottom watering, you want the water to wick up, make contact with that soil and wick up all the way to the top. So that is why you saw me kind of pressing down a little bit. You don't need it super compact, but you do want to do a little bit of compacting to make sure that the soil is at the bottom of that tray. I don't like to bump up any of my seeds. I just don't have, again, the time to do that or the space to really bump these up into little 4-inch containers. So I really try to be precise on when I am starting everything, and I just stagger things perfectly. The only exception is going to be for things like sweet peas. I will probably start these out in these trays and then I will bump them up into something a little bit deeper and then get them transplanted out early spring. But for the most part, where I start my seeds, these are where they're going to live until they're getting ready to be transplanted out. So keep that in mind if you are kind of like a lazy gardener or lazy farmer and you don't want to bump up your seed starts, start out with something that's a little bit bigger. So again, if you're using like the 288 cells, those are so tiny and those are really to get things to germinate, and then you're going to have to bump them up. Or you can start out in something like a 72 cell, or my preferred one is going to be the 50 cell ones, because those are just big enough that our seedlings will do well, and then it gives me plenty of time to get them out and I'm not having to worry about bumping anything up into 4-inch containers. So it's just one of those little time saver tips that I like to mention to people. Anyways, I am going to finish these up and I will put them in our seed starting room. Again, that room stays about 70 to 72 degrees at all times. So these will not need to go on heat mat. If you don't have an area that stays consistently between 70 and 72 degrees, which is what most of these seeds require to germinate, you want to make sure you have a heat mat so you have even germination. Anyways, I think that is going to be it for today's video. I hope this was insightful and you picked up some tips along the way. We still have a ton of flowers to start, which I'm so excited about. I know this isn't like the funnest thing to do, but if you just start thinking about all of the beautiful flowers you're going to have in your garden, that kind of gets me through the whole process, because I know it's not everybody's like favorite thing to do, sowing seeds, but I enjoy it. I think it's kind of relaxing, and I just kind of can check out and sow a bunch of seeds and just imagine all of the beauty that is going to be coming. So anyways, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today and watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.